Humanity has a long-standing fascination with extreme hair growth. Reaching lengths that drag on the floor is so rare that it's meticulously documented and certified by Guinness World Records. Take Shay Cupping. By refusing to cut her hair for over 3 decades, she managed to grow locks that extended past 5 meters. Curious, but if hair constantly grows, why doesn't anyone who simply throws away their scissors eventually hit that 5-meter mark? Because hair length is governed by a strict biological equation. To find a person's maximum possible length, you have to multiply their hair's growth rate by the exact duration of the follicle's growth cycle. To solve this equation, we have to look past the strands on our heads and examine the microscopic factories and biological clocks operating beneath the skin. Our first variable, speed, is controlled roughly half a centimeter below the skin's surface. Here, at the base of tube-shaped follicles, sits the hair bulb. Inside this bulb is an assembly line made of rapidly dividing matrix cells. As these cells duplicate, they develop into specialized structures called trichocytes. They fill themselves with dense, cable-like keratin proteins to harden. As more are produced, they stack up, forming a solid strand that is pushed upward. But the matrix cells don't decide what kind of hair to build on their own. They follow blueprints provided by another cell within the bulb, the fibroblast. Fibroblasts instruct the matrix cells to build short 1-centimeter strands for your eyelashes and command much faster, longer growth for your scalp. These instructions are hard-coded. If a doctor takes a scalp follicle and implants it on an eyelid to give a patient longer lashes, that follicle will keep growing at its original scalp rate of 15 centimeters per year. The patient will have to trim their new lashes regularly to avoid a blinding curtain. So the first variable of our equation, speed, is entirely dictated by the fibroblast's strict instructions, locking in a steady growth rate regardless of where the hair lives. That brings us to the second variable, time. Every follicle has an internal timer that limits exactly how long its assembly line stays running. This chart plots the life cycle of an active follicle. For the average person, scalp hair will steadily grow for 5 to 7 years before the follicle simply shuts down production. If we multiply that average scalp growth rate of 15 centimeters a year by a maximum 7-year cycle, we get a biological ceiling of about 1 meter. That is the maximum length the average human can grow their hair. Shay Cupping reached her 5-meter record because a rare combination of genetics, hormones, and health factors kept her follicle's internal timer running far beyond the human average. When that timer finally does run out, the hair strand is shed, falling out slowly on its own or in clumps in your hairbrush. Usually, this is a temporary pause. The fibroblasts quickly trigger the matrix cells, and the factory resets to produce a new strand to take its place. But over the course of our lives, the components of this biological factory undergo wear and tear. As we age, the follicle gradually depletes its supply of specialized stem cells. When the follicle runs out of melanocyte stem cells, the hair loses its pigment. The newly grown strands emerge colorless, becoming visible gray hair. Because our follicles only hold a handful of these pigment-producing cells to begin with, this supply tends to run out early, making gray hairs one of the first visible signs of an aging follicle. Eventually, the follicle also runs out of epithelial stem cells. Without them, the entire structure begins to shrink, churning out weaker, thinner, and shorter strands until production shuts down completely. This structural collapse leads to baldness. While it's a natural result of cell depletion, it can be accelerated by testosterone, which physically blocks the fibroblast's blueprints from ever reaching the matrix cells. We can treat some of these symptoms by removing excess hormones or using specialized shampoos. But at a biological level, our hair is bound by a strict equation, a finite cycle of birth, growth, and eventually a graceful conclusion.